I am Paul and Bahr. I'm here with my wife Kim. We live here in Janesville, and we're the parents of two adopted boys who have FASD. And we're going to quickly go over what FASD is and what you as law enforcement officers need to know about it. Thank you. So what is FASD? Let me take this off so you can see. FASD stands for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders, and it is an umbrella term used to describe a range of effects that happen to people that have been exposed to alcohol in utero. It's also known as fetal alcohol syndrome, FAS, FAE, which is fetal alcohol effects, and alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, ARND. You've likely heard the phrase, don't drink while you're pregnant. There's a good reason behind it. What does alcohol do to the brain?
So basically we have an MRI here of two different brains, and the one on the left is your typical normal brain. The one on the right is a brain that's obviously affected by alcohol, and you can see that it not only affects the shape and the size of the brain, but it affects different areas of the brain, one of them being the corpus callosum, which is just the bridge between the two hemispheres of the brain. One is the cerebellum, which controls our coordination and balance. Another one is the basal ganglia, which controls our executive functioning and learning, and the cerebral cortex, which controls our sensory issues, our motor control, and our working memory. And the one thing to remember about FASD is that it is permanent brain damage. There is nothing that can be done to fix it. There's no pill that can be taken to make it any better. People just have to live with the consequences of this. So kind of giving you a huge flyover of what FASD is, but how common is it? Looking at this graph from 2019, you can see that there's a lot of different birth defects that we're looking at, and the one that's most prevalent is FASD. It's even 2 to 3 times more prevalent than autism. But we rarely hear about FASD. And so why is that? We don't know. It's not a diagnosis in the DSM-4 yet or DSM-5, so it's very rarely heard about, but we hear a lot about autism. And so now that we know that it's so common, how are we going to know when we encounter someone with FASD?
Unfortunately, the short answer is you won't. FASD is what's called an invisible disability. You can't see it like Down syndrome and know immediately that you're working with someone that has this condition. You have to look at the behaviors. There are some similarities to autism. There's a lot of parallels with it. So if you've got some experience with autism, you might have a little bit of a knowledge, at least going into a situation with someone who has FASD. But basically, you need to look for clues into their behavior. So they are both, FASD and autism are both developmental disabilities. They both affect the typical brain function and development. People with FASD and autism, they both have difficulty with social interactions. They've got difficulty with the use and understanding of body language. They've got difficulty expressing their needs and their wants both verbally and non-verbally. They both have short attention spans. And they both can have abnormal sensitivity to sensory stimuli, both over and under sensitivity to pain. So if those are the similarities, how is FASD unique from autism?
FASD is unique in a lot of different ways, actually. The one thing to remember, as I said earlier, that it is the permanent brain damage. So when you're working with someone with FASD, they appear neurotypical. They appear like everyone else. Because they're able to mimic normal traits of other people. But if you spend a few minutes with them, you'll know that if you're working with an 18-year-old, more likely you're working with a 10-year-old, because socially, emotionally, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly by interacting with them. Some of the other unique factors are they may not follow rules or instructions. They may not be able to understand what you're saying because their processing speed is a lot slower with the brain damage. And so they may not also be able to follow multi-step directions. One-step directions is much easier for them, but if you try to tell them 2 or 3 things to do, they're not going to be able to do that because they're not going to be able to remember because their short-term memory is pretty much wiped out with the alcohol. They may claim that they did not hear you. And chances are they didn't. It's because their brain is already in overdrive. And so for that processing speed, they probably did not hear a word you said because they're too worried about what's going on in the situation. They have very high anxiety. So they may display a lot of bravery, a lot of bravado to cover that up, just because they want to appear normal like everyone else. They may not appear to show remorse or take responsibility for their actions. We have a saying in our house, it's not my fault. We hear it quite often, and I'm sure you as officers have heard it quite often as well.
I'm sure you guys never hear it, it's not my fault.
It's not my fault. And that's typically what we hear with an FASD person. A perfect example of this is when our son was younger, he kicked his shoe off and made a mark on our wall, and he was insistent that he didn't do it. I sat right here and watched you. You did it. No, the shoe did it. I didn't do it. So it's that disconnect, too, of not being able to understand the whole connection between the shoe and his foot. They may not be able to answer questions like in a situation like what happened or give a situation correctly because they have what we call Swiss cheese memory. There's a lot of holes in their memory. It's kind of like living with a person with Alzheimer's. They have no short-term memory, and their long-term memory is somewhat intact at times if they can retrieve it and recall it at a certain time. But chances are they can't. If you ask them again what happened in a situation and they're inconsistent with their story, it's not that they're lying. Most likely it's not that they're lying. It's because they're, again, filling in the holes of their memory with guesses about what they think might have happened. And so they're just trying to again, appear normal like everyone else. They also, repeated questioning and repeated things that you might want to say to them, they get very easily overwhelmed, and so they may just shut down completely and not talk anymore at all. So the next slide kind of shows us kind of a wrap-up of what we're talking about necessarily is, it's like the dysmaturity. It's not, they are immature, but it's more of a dysmaturity. So if you're working with someone who their actual age is 18, their expressive language may be older. You can probably tell, you might be thinking that they're a typical person because they have this great vocabulary and they're talking like a normal person. They may be a 20-year-old. But in their in a lot of different areas, reading ability might be about a 16-year-old level. Their living skills and what they're able to do to live on their own might be at about an 11-year-old level. Their abstract concepts and time, and money, that's about an 8-year-old level. Abstract things do not work well for a person with FASD. They do not understand it at all. Their social skills might be at about a 7-year-old level. And again, their comprehension and social maturity is 6. So even though we have a 20-year-old at home, socially, emotionally, he's about 10. And they usually go about half the chronological age. So now, we kind of know a little bit about it. What can you do as officers when you encounter someone with FASD?
First thing is speak slowly. We mentioned that they have auditory processing delays. A good suggestion is give about 10 to 20 seconds in between each instruction or statement that you're making. Give them time to take it in, evaluate it, internalize it, figure out what it is that you actually said. And in that time, don't mistake silence as a refusal to answer. Again, they're processing things. It's going to take them longer than we typically would expect what we call a neurotypical person to give an answer in. This is one I struggle with, is speak calmly. Trust me. So while taking command and control of a situation, I'm sure is a significant part of your job in the heat of the moment, it can really escalate the conflict pretty quickly. They like to mirror your level of energy or excitement. So you go here, they're going to meet you right there real quick. You escalate up above to again gain that upper hand, boom, they're coming right up. And this happens on the daily in our household. Take it from me. Use literal and straightforward wording. They don't understand abstract concepts. It's just too hard for them. Money is a prime example. Back when our kids were younger, like 4 or 5 years old, Grandpa gave them $1 each to go buy something at the store. Well, he only had $1 bill and he had 4 quarters, so he gave 4 quarters to one kid, $1 bill to the other. We had a massive problem because it was not the same. 4 quarters is not $1. We all know it's the same value, same amount of money, didn't click for them. So that's why I say abstract concepts like that, they don't get, they are very much in the concrete world of thinking. They also can't understand sarcasm or jargon. One of the funny things I used to do, when I'm not giving presentations, I'm usually a very sarcastic person. I like to joke around, have fun. So when my kids were younger, they'd always ask, what do we have for lunch, breakfast, whatever. My thing was always, poop on a stick. Really? No, you're not going to have it. And every time I'd say it, one of our kids would be like, I don't want poop on a stick. I don't want it. And it took months for them to realize that I was joking around. And it still doesn't always stick. And our kids are 20 and 18 now. So it's still like, is Dad joking? Is he serious? No, I'm joking, okay? Again, only give one instruction at a time. Processing delays. Give them time to figure out what it is that you're saying and internalize it. Don't ask why or how questions. They've got sequencing issues and recall issues. Again, short-term memory problems. And go ahead and rephrase questions if it just doesn't seem like they're understanding what it is that you're asking them. Sometimes the wording is just not working for them. A big thing is look at the crime that you're in the middle of at the moment here. Is it something that took some planning to do, or something that was more of an impulse action? One of the hallmarks of people with FASD is they cannot plan very well, if at all. Again, it's the executive functioning impairment that they are stricken with for the entirety of their lives. They have a signature side effect of FASD is lack of impulse control. You're much more likely to get something on like shoplifting. I wanted it, I saw it, I took it. Didn't even think about it. Another thing is ask them to explain certain concepts like legal rights or legal representation. I asked my son the other day, what does it mean? Tell me what legal rights are. Well, they're rights. No, what are legal rights though? But they're rights. So they might use the same word to define the word or the concept that you're trying to get them to explain. And we all know that rights are, like an access or a privilege or something that we have just because we exist as humans. That isn't necessarily something that they are able to understand. And finally, and this is probably the most important, is people with FASD, they have supports, which are family, friends, and spouses that act as their external brains. And an external brain is basically somebody that functions on their behalf and helps them navigate the world that is so confusing for them and so complicated for everything that they need to be able to handle and just don't have the capacity to. So if they say, hey, call my mom, call my counselor, call my whoever it is, bring them in. It will make your lives a lot easier because you're going to have someone that's going to have neurotypical functioning, most likely, and they'll be able to help weed through this cesspool of craziness that you might actually encounter, because they're not going to be able to really be counted on to help very much. So key things to remember: permanent brain damage, not going away, can't be fixed. Therapy can help, but it's not going to take care of all the problems. Swiss cheese memory impacts recall and processing and sequencing. Processing delays. They're just going to take longer to take stuff in and interpret it and internalize it. They're concrete thinkers. They act half of their chronicle age, all aspects of life considered. So again, if you're talking with somebody who's 30, let's say, they'll be about 15, give or take, across the average of the behavior spectrum. And like I said a few seconds ago, external brains and supports help them through all of their life. We've got some handouts here that kind of give the bullet points. We'll pass those out. It has our contact information on it. Feel free to drop us an email on there or give us a phone call. More than willing to answer any questions that way. We've got a few minutes left in our time slot that we were given here. If you have any questions, now's your time. All right, well, we know your jobs are already hard. Working with people with FASD is only going to make them harder. You've probably already seen them and experienced them. Maybe didn't know that you were working with someone in that situation. But they just introduce so many other variables into the equation and make it so much more complicated. Hopefully the information we gave was some help. There's plenty of information out there on the internet about it. If you'd like some help trying to find that or clearing up any information, like I said, drop us an email on the handout that we'll pass out. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.